shortly after completing that study, Mylone and McBroom, the project team, myself, the Nature Conservancy, Sarah Burns from the Nature Conservancy, and Sarah Turner from Division of Marine Fisheries held the second public meeting, which we shared the results of that feasibility study. Largely really formed the basis for advancing in the project and really the core amount of work that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. So over the last year or two, we've been focusing heavily on completing the preliminary design. We've initiated the Section 106 consultation process, which is really the meat of the historical side that we're going to touch on. Over that year or so, the last year or so, we've also been meeting individually with some of the key stakeholders. We heard at that second public meeting, a lot of concerns and questions from folks from the Lincoln Athletic Club. We've heard questions about the golf course upstream. So we met with each of those different stakeholders a number of times to really understand their concerns and understand the questions that they had about the project and tried to incorporate that into the design that we have today. We've also just started the formal regulatory process. We completed the MEPA consultation process earlier this spring and summer. We just submitted our first round of permit applications and expect to continue to do that over the next couple months, which will really set us on a track for completing final design and permitting during next calendar year, 2021, with the hope that we'll be able to put the project out for public bidding and construction in 2022. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation. So with that, I think I can turn it over to Andy Green and Jim Murak from Mylone and McBroom to really walk you through some of the key aspects of the design process.
Good evening. My name is Andy Green, and I'm a licensed professional engineer with Mylone and McBroom, and I also manage the Water Resources Engineering Group at Mylone and McBroom. And I just wanted to kind of do like a sort of an overview at the beginning here, just to talk about dam removals. And this is actually a really good graphic. All of those little red dots represent the dams in Massachusetts. It's actually kind of hard to see the state. There are so many of them. And, what they represent is dams in the Northeast go back starting the colonial era through the Industrial Revolution. Those dams were constructed to power the mills and the industry throughout the region. And unfortunately, over the last 100 years, those mills have either fallen into disuse or disrepair or been removed or been repurposed for other things. And what we're left with is a dam that no longer has a purpose. What's important, I guess, is that people don't always think about this, but infrastructure has a service life, and it's usually 50 to 100 years. So in this case, if you have all of these dams in Massachusetts that are nearing the end of their service life, it can be a hazard for downstream. When dams aren't maintained and eventually fail, they can cause catastrophic flooding, damage to infrastructure, and potentially loss of life. Can you go to the next slide, Jim? Yeah. And believe it or not, there are close to 3,000 dams in Massachusetts. That's a lot of dams. Now, some of them are still used, but the majority of them have either been beyond their useful life. Want to go to the next one, Jim? So project needs. So I talked a little bit about that. So this project will improve public safety by removing the dam, and also address a potential hazard for an uncontrolled dam failure. The High Street Bridge is actually undersized, and so by replacing it, that's a need or improvement to the project, or to the town through the project. And then the other thing is this dam is the first dam from Narragansett Bay, so fish can get all the way to this dam without being obstructed. So by removing the dam, you access upstream spawning grounds and you improve fish passage. The other thing too is I would say that both the dam and the bridge are undersized to convey storm flows under what we would call 20th century design criteria. So they're even that much more undersized when you factor in climate change and increases in rainfall. The other thing that removing the dam and increasing the capacity of the bridge will reduce localized flood impacts. And this is a really old photo, but it's a pretty good example. This is from 1968. This is actually not the worst flood of record, but you can see that's the Lincoln Athletic Building, and basically the river's all the way around the building there. So moving on to goals and objectives, the project will improve multimodal transportation and utilities in the area. Will stabilize infrastructure and other structures nearby, including the Lincoln Athletic Building, and mitigate impacts to water-dependent uses. The dams in general impound sediment behind them. So if there's a catastrophic dam failure, the sediment then gets released all at once and goes downstream. Luckily, this particular dam, there's not a significant amount of sediment. And when I say that, often dams will have 4, 6, 8 feet of sediment accumulate behind the dam. In this case, the impoundment, much of the upper part of the impoundment has a foot or less of sediment. And then most of the sediment is between the dam and the bridge, where there's only about 2 feet of sediment. And then the other thing is, when we have a project like this, we like to improve recreational use and improve access and be able to bring people to the river. And last, but certainly one of the more important reasons, is removal of the dam will restore the natural river processes that would have occurred prior to the placement of the dam. So this is just an overview location of the site. That yellow line is the town line between Bridgewater and West Bridgewater. And so obviously the site is the red circle that's to the south, just downstream of there, it circles High Street at this scale. And then working your way upstream, the blue line is the thread of the meandering river. You can see the golf course actually shows up really well to the right of the river up in West Bridgewater. And the impoundment does actually extend about 2 miles almost to the center of West Bridgewater and the Route 28 bridge. This is a closer view of the site. Stanley Ironworks Park is directly in the middle of the slide, with High Street running from southwest to sort of northeast to east and right through the middle of the site. The Lincoln Athletic Association is to the north of High Street, and you can see it fills that little triangle of land surrounded by the river. The main thread of the river is to the right through the bridge, and you can see the dam actually shows up in this photo as the white turbulent flow over the crest of the spillway. It's also important to notice that the Bridgewater Highway Department is in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. Want to go to the next one, Jim? So this is a really good shot of High Street Bridge, and that's obviously the Lincoln Athletic Building that's very close to the river there. And this actually is a really good illustration of, even if you don't really have a good idea of how big bridges should be, if you look at the downstream side of the roadway there, you can see those 4 little teeny stone culverts that whole river has to flow through. And it's very undersized. So go ahead, Jim, to the next one. And then this is a nice picture of the downstream face of the dam with no water spilling over the top of it. Many people may not have actually seen it in this condition. It's kind of interesting. There's a stone pier in the middle, and then there's the piers on either end. But what you're looking at is actually a timber crib spillway. There's 2 of them there, and believe it or not, that's actually made out of wood. You can see all the moss growing on the left-hand side. And as you can imagine, wood in a river doesn't last as long as other materials, and the timber decking gets rotten, and then the dam becomes leaky. I've actually worked on quite a few of these timber. They're called timber crib dams, and it's actually I was thinking about this. I did an inspection on one that was actually quite large, like 400 or 500 feet long, and it was used for hydropower, or diverted the water for hydro. And there was I was doing an inspection, and while I was on site, they were doing some construction work replacing the timber decking, and I was talking to the guy, and he said, "Yep, every year we come out and we replace the rotten boards." So it was annual maintenance that they would replace whatever boards were rotten on, and that was a dam that was maintained every year because it was used for hydropower. You want to go to the next one, Jim? I think that might be my last one. It is.
All right, thanks, Andy. Hey everyone, my name is Jim Murak. I'm also a professional engineer and a certified floodplain manager with Malone and McBroom. I've been lead design engineer on the project. So I was just going to walk you through some of the design elements and some of the things that, through the years of analysis and study that Chris and Andy described, we have arrived to. And also with public input, with speaking with some of the members of the LAA and other concerned parties, we've come to a pretty robust design. So walking through each item little by little here. First, we'll be removing the dam. It seems obvious from the title of this project, but that is not always the case. Dams can come in many forms and functions, and so we're really just removing the timber spillway that Andy was just describing, and not going any farther into either abutment. Oftentimes, dams can run for hundreds and hundreds of feet beyond what you see in the spillway, and for a number of reasons we'll get to in a minute, that's not the case here. But it does have an interesting timber structure downstream, highlighted in yellow, about 150 feet downstream as well, that would have to be removed. And as mentioned, we'd be replacing the undersized bridge. The bridge structure is currently just dry stacked stone masonry with 4 box, I guess we could call culverts, made out of the stone that are vastly undersized. The current bridge overtops in anything in 10-year flood events or more, versus what we will be proposing to replace is a 55-foot clear span, which would pass a 500-year event with more than 1.5 foot of airspace of freeboard underneath it. So removing of the dam and replacing of the bridge would open up a significant area of channel that has not been, of banks that have not been exposed to the air. They've been underwater this whole time. We'd be lowering the water surface elevations in the area of the Lincoln Athletic Association by about 5 feet. So we would be reconstructing the channel through there, and we have evaluated the proposed conditions, the post-dam removal conditions, using hydraulic modeling to determine what kind of velocities and shear stresses and erosive capacity will be there. And so using that to anticipate what really is needed for armoring. So we've designed some boulder armoring and used bioengineering, live stakes, and other factors that will be on protecting the banks. Also protecting the channel bed itself, because as Andy mentioned, there are some erodible sediments in place. Those that are not removed will be armored in place. We'll be using in-stream structures that will mimic like a natural turbulent area, like a riffle kind of a flow feature. We're also looking at realigning the intersection of High Street and Wall Street. This is sort of incidental just to the replacement of the bridge. In order to achieve a wide enough span bridge to achieve the 500-year flood, the bridge had to be substantially longer than what was in place. And the proximity of the LAA to the bridge intersection complicated the placement of abutments there without disturbing the building. So consequently, the bridge pushed into the intersection a little bit. It's incidental, but it's also an improvement. We're lowering the amount of impervious area by almost 3,000 square feet, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about stormwater runoff in a concentrated area like that, it's actually quite significant and should elicit a pretty substantial water quality improvement there. We're also realigning the intersection to make it more consistent with current safety standards and better sight lines coming on the approach from down the hill to the right on the high street. And then I touched on it a little bit. We're going to implement some stormwater quality improvements, both at the new alignment of the intersection and parking area, but also to the west of the project, where we're not doing any other proposed work. But High Street does extend all the way to Route 28. It's about 1,500 feet of roadway. And currently that storm drainage system just discharges right into the mill race. But instead of allowing that to continue, we're going to install a hydrodynamic separator offline in the shoulder of the road, which is shown as that green rectangle with the 5 next to it. And that will treat the first 1 inch of rainfall, collect all the sediment, road sand, and every debris that's flowing through the system, and store it so that it can be removed on an annual, semi-annual basis by Public Works. And then on the east side of the river, down by the the highway garage, and where we're realigning the intersection in the parking lot, even though we are reducing the amount of pavement, we still propose to do a bioinfiltration swale and provide some additional water quality for that whole paved area that drains to it. So just in the effort to give everyone here some visuals of what these things might look like that I'm describing, we have this artistic rendering of a photo of the Lincoln Athletic Association looking downstream. And you can see on the left side of the photo, on the top existing conditions, you can see the stone culvert that's in place and the riprap armoring that the LIA has along their bank. So we then on the bottom, the photo simulation, have put this rendering together that depicts the 5-foot reduction in normal water surface elevations. It shows what that replaced bridge could look like, will likely look like, and also shows the extension of that boulder protection and that riprap protection along the bank of the Lincoln Athletic Association. It also shows a significant increase in the herbaceous vegetation along the bottom of the screen, and the bottom of the rendering, where the lowered water surface elevations will allow a bordering vegetated wetland to really emerge rather than just being, stagnant land underwater. For property owners who are located along the impoundment, which is about 2 miles long, we prepared this graphic just to give everyone an idea of what you can expect for the water surface elevations to be reduced as you flow upstream. Directly upstream of the dam, we're looking at a reduction of 6 feet. You can see in the red numbers, and as at the town line, it's down to 5 feet. Along the golf course, it's ranging between 2 and 4 feet. And by the time you've gotten to South Main Street Route 28, the water surface elevation should be unchanged by the removal of the dam. So this is an unrelated project, but it is related because it wasn't a historic dam removal, very similar to what we're proposing here. It's about a little over 2 miles northeast of where the High Street Dam is located. It's on the Setauket River, so it's a different water course, but there was a historic mill dam that was here. It was removed 3 years ago by DER. And we just wanted to show you this to get a sense of what an impounded area, land underwater with these sorts of industrial mill dams and the sort of fluvial geomorphology you see in the watershed near you guys in this project site. This is the kind of restoration that you can expect. And this is what you can expect to see, the bounce back of the vegetation and the banks and how the water course has reestablished itself to what was likely a pre-dam condition. And this is a slide from Jim Turek, who I'm momentarily going to be passing things on to. Jim Turek is with NOAA. And this is another dam removal that was just done in January of this year, before life changed. And you can kind of see the same sort of thing. You see on the left, the community that was there with the land underwater, the lily pads indicating stagnant water. And then on the right, you see the more vibrant, the BVWs, the vegetation that is established. It doesn't take long. There's so much seed stock in these buried in these land underwaters and sediments that really one growing season, you can start to see these things come back to life. So this will be my last slide, and this is just to discuss sort of the mechanics of how this kind of work gets done. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail, and there has been a lot of studies and design reports and materials have been submitted to various regulatory agencies where, you know, anyone who's interested in this can certainly get lots more information. But this really just kind of shows the areas that we want to access the site with, where we want to drive the heavy machinery, where we want to use water control and diversion structures so that we're not working in wet, turbid, muddy conditions, and things like that. And this is important because specifically on the southern side, where Stanley Iron Works Park is, you know, we were very careful to select a meander. It sort of looks like a meandering U-shaped access road, which is done intentionally. You know, that was placed there to avoid any damaging effects of large machinery traversing through this historical park, any incidental or accidental damage to what could be underground foundations or things that are not immediately visible at the surface. And this route was selected because it was investigated. It's already grassed, and that is in the process of being reviewed by the archaeological consultants and the MHC. I'll let Jim Turek talk more about this. Again, he's with NOAA, and he is NOAA's the lead federal agency on this project, and he's much more familiar with this side of things. So with that, Jim, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Well, good evening, everybody. As Jim said, I'm Jim Turek. I work for NOAA's Restoration Center out in Narragansett, Rhode Island, in a normal situation. And I'm a restoration ecologist. I've been with the Restoration Center for going on 22 years now. And I've worked on somewhere on the order of about 40 to 42 dam removal or other fish passage projects in the Northeast region. So I cover this area. And so the first thing you'd probably ask is, you know, if we're going to be covering historical resources, why would a restoration ecologist be presenting this? Well, I'm the one responsible since we undertook a federal action in that in 2019, we had a grant award to the Mass DER for this project. And so there was a grant award of $175,000 that was matched by the state and other funds that were compiled to put this work together. And so myself, and then we also have Suzanne Payton from the Fish and Wildlife Service that is representing her agency tonight as a supporting agency. And so NOAA is more or less serving as the lead federal agency for the action and the funding. And so under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, we're responsible for doing consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office, as well as the Tribal Historic Preservation Offices in this area. And so we have two tribes that cover this area, the Wampanoag Aquinas, as well as the Mashpee Wampanoag as well. And so I'm going to mostly focus on briefly go over the process. I'm not, by no means am I a historical archaeologist or historian. I'm certainly very interested in it. But we have Suzanne Chareau here also on the call tonight, and she's the senior archaeologist and principal investigator from the Public Archaeology Lab, who has more or less completed the more recent historical assessment and help prepare the report. And so she will be available to answer any of the questions, certainly that are probably more pertinent to the details of the historic or archaeological resources. And so I'm going to turn that over to her at the end of the presentation to answer any of your questions. So let's see if we can go to the next slide, Jim. So just to take people a step back, there was a initial cultural resources study that was done by the Archaeological and Historical Services consultant. They were out of Connecticut. They worked as a sub-consultant to Malone McBroom. They completed a report in January of 2019, and so that was the first initial work that was done as part of the project. And then as time went on, we undertook other work. Chris Hool and myself actually met with Steve Craddock from the Aquinas February 13th out on the site to begin initial consultations to try to get their input. And Bettina Washington was also there. Let's see, in February of this year, the Bridgewater Historical Commission held their meeting. Chris, I believe, was in attendance. Unfortunately, that night I had another meeting that I had to attend, and so I could not catch that meeting, the BHC. But Chris was there, of course, to listen in and try to answer questions. And then in June, Pal, Suzanne, and colleagues went out to begin and complete the field work at the site in June. And then by August, the summary report, as well as an inventory form, was completed for the ironwork site and bridge. And so at least we have an understanding of what's transpired in terms of different assessment work. And let's go to the next slide now. And so in brief summary, you can kind of see on the left graphic here, which much has been already covered by Andy and Jim, is that we have the dam that's down in the lower right-hand side. And then for about a little over 2 miles, we have the impounded river. And combined, that is what's called the area of potential effects. And that was a determination that was recommended by PAL after they completed their work in June and the report in August. And, and prior to that, of course, there's a lot of work that has been done in this site. And as you can see, the list that's there, it includes not only the High Street or Jenkins Dam that's been looked at in the past and documented by the Mass Historical Commission. We have the fish ladder itself that was from way back when. It really hasn't functioned properly. Well, it was never really built correctly. We've learned so much in the last several decades on how to best pass migratory fish, which my agency and myself and others are very interested in trying to restore. And so that was one of the reasons why we've helped fund this project. But in terms of the old fishway itself, it never really worked very well. There was a weir, or I should say there is still a weir at the base of our entranceway to the fishway that is yet another piece of the structure that exists out there that helps divert fish from going up to the dam, but rather hopefully get into the fishway to pass. But again, the hydraulics of the existing fishway just really aren't conducive to really passing fish well. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but it's certainly important to understanding of why we're looking at dam removal for fish passage restoration. Okay, so and then we have other components. There of course is the Bridgewater Ironworks Historical District itself, which includes both the dam and the fish ladder as contributing features or resources in the district. We have the Bridgewater Industrial and Transportation Corridor. And lastly, we have the High Street Bridge, which meets the criteria for the National Register for Historic Places eligibility. And so collectively, that's what's being looked at under the historical assessment and consultation process. Next slide, please. Okay, and so just a little bit on what's transpired in terms of what process and what's been done to date. So back in January of 2019, what's called the project notification form was submitted to the Mass Historical Commission, or MHC. The MHC responded in February, basically explaining, what should be done in terms of moving forward on assessment work. Then in February, there was the filing to the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act filing, which was what's called environmental notification form, or ENF. And that included, by that time, what's basically 60% design plans. And as part of that, it was basically determined that what's called an expanded ENF would be completed, and MHC provided a response on during March back to the expanded ENF. Hard to say sometimes. And then the MIPA certificate was released by the agency in April, and then the record of decision occurred in May of this year. Okay, and so where we're at now is, so letters by myself on behalf of NOAA as lead federal agency were sent out to MHC, and that was in September, and that was the recommended APE, and MHC responded back by basically a concurrence response where they stamped the letter, sent it back, and dated October 6th, saying, yes, we concur with your recommendations and conclusions. Last slide, please. And so where we're at now is in late October. I sent out letters to each of the following entities listed here, including the Bureau of Underwater Archaeological Resources, the Bridgewater Historical Commission. Some of the folks are on the call here tonight. The Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead, or the Aquinas, the Mashpee Tribe, and if there are other potential consulting parties that may be out there that that are interested in being consulted or provide input on this, certainly I'm be happy to hear that this evening from anybody that may want to express them. And next slide. Okay, so for the next steps, Andy and Jim, of course, are going to be preparing the 90% plans, or I should say they are well underway with their 90% plans. But essentially, we're seeking the state, SHPO, the TIPOs, and any other local consulting parties that received the letter to provide a response back with any potential input. And of course, as I said earlier, we have a findings of effect of the known resources and sensitive resource areas. And so that was all summarized in the report prepared by PAL. And that includes Suzanne Shuro, as I mentioned earlier. And the next one of the other steps we also have to do is submit a electronic consultation with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or ACHP. They're a federal advisory organization, and they basically make sure that NOAA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, are doing our jobs, as we're trying to explain here tonight in terms of process that we're doing consultation involving the public and other interested parties. And ultimately, if there is the adverse effect by doing the dam removal and or the other work that we've talked about tonight, what would be anticipated would be to prepare a draft memorandum of agreement that would include NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, MassDER, and any other potential parties to address any potential adverse effects from the project affecting historical or archaeological resources. So that's a process that would be sent out as a draft. The consulting parties would review it, provide their feedback. Ultimately, it would be a signed document explaining what may be mitigation measures to address the adverse effects. So that's it in a summary. I'm now going to turn it over, I think, to Chris. I think Chris Houle, is going to do the next steps of the project and open it up to questions and answers, I believe.
Thank you very much, Jim and Jim and Andy. That was a great summary of what we've been working on the last few years here. So hopefully that was informative for everybody. As you mentioned, I will just touch on a few next steps here before we get to the question and answer slide session. So as Jim mentioned, we'll be completing the Section 106 consultation process soon in 2021, most likely. kind of concurrently with that, we'll be completing the permitting and final design stage. As Andy and Jim laid out, the 90% design is well underway. We have a number of permit submissions that already went in about a week or two ago. We expect to be in front of the conservation commissions, both in Bridgewater and West Bridgewater, very shortly, potentially December of this year and January of next year. So within the next month or two in both communities. We'll be working to finalize access agreements with key neighboring abutters that we might need to access their property to do part of the work that Jim and Andy explained. That'll take some time, but we hope to have that completed by about the next fall. And while all this is going on, we're going to continue to fundraise for construction. We do not have any funds identified at this time for construction activities. We are fully funded for the design process. So, we expect that to be completed, and that will sort of set us on a good footing for raising those construction funds. If all that goes well, during 2021, we hope to be ready for construction bidding by the winter of 21/22. Typically, you get the best bid prices in the winter when contractors' work is slowing down. So we're hoping to target that. And that would put us on track for construction starting the late spring of 2022, really kind of getting in the water, doing the bulk of the work in the middle of the summer, because we do have various fisheries time of year restrictions and other time of year restrictions that we need to abide by. So with that, Jim, can you advance one more slide here? So I'll open it up here shortly for questions and comments on the project. We do have about 30 minutes. I think we're doing pretty good on time, but we have about 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes that we can allocate toward the question and answer. We are going to stop abruptly at 7 o'clock. I think what we'll try to do is, if you can raise your hand through the Zoom feature, we'll try to call on you that way. I might take a first stab at the answers and possibly direct your questions to the various partners that are on the call. All the partners will be available to answer any questions. I would ask that we're going to limit questions to one at a time. That way we can hear from everybody that has joined us here tonight. And we ask that you kind of keep your question to about 3 minutes or so, or less, just so we can make sure we get everybody in. Jennifer, before I start, would you like to add anything to that?
Nope. Just for those of you who don't know, you can go into the participant menu and raise your hand, or I've set up the chat feature that it goes directly to me. So you can just chat, I have a question, and we can unmute you that way as well. So we already have one question from Monica Bentley. So I will go ahead and unmute her.
I'll just say my email is up on this slide. So if we don't get to your question tonight, you're more than welcome to email me, and we'll answer your question in writing over email, or I'll send it along to the right person. So please go ahead.
Okay, you should be all set.
Okay. I'm Monica Bentley. I am the river guide for the Taunton River Watershed Alliance. I am also the chair of the River Access Committee for the Taunton River Stewardship Council. So I really like to get an idea of what recreation is going to look like once this work is complete, especially with a 6-foot drop in the water before the bridge. And I'm thrilled to be able to access this stretch of the river, because right now you can't. So yeah, what's that going to look like?
I guess I'll just start quickly here, briefly. Make no mistake about it. We are removing the dam, and that is going to drop the water levels, as Jim Urak laid out, about 6 feet at the dam. So it will change. Particularly for the folks at the Lincoln Athletic Association, their view of the river, their potential the way they interacted with the river is certainly going to change. That being said, there, as you just alluded to, there is no public access to the river, and this will help that. There'll be, right now, anybody that is paddling down the river would have to portage around the High Street Bridge as well as the dam.
That's kind of tough. It's a very long portage.
Yeah, so in this case, somebody could just paddle right through. I believe maybe Andy and Jim want to weigh in, but in my opinion, I think the recreational opportunities will improve here. During the middle of the summer, the flows might be low. I mean, you saw a picture there that Andy had where there wasn't any water flowing over the dam, and that might be the case in drought years. It might be tough, but I think overall the experience will improve because you'll essentially be connecting many miles of river that is otherwise broken up. So Andy and Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
I guess I would just say that the stretch of river downstream of the dam for a good ways, that's similar to what our site will be like when we're done. So that's below the dam is all free flowing, and sometimes in the spring flows can be kind of high, and there's pretty good there, and then in drier periods it's not as deep, but it would be free flowing. It'd be very similar to what's downstream, and you wouldn't have to portage anymore. The new bridge is designed such that there's 1.5 feet of freeboard. That would be, so that's a 1.5 feet of clearance above a 500-year storm event. So you would be able to kayak through there very easily. In fact, it's probably would be very similar to if you went all the way up to the Route 28 bridge in West Bridgewater. We kayaked through that. There's plenty of room between the river and the top of the bridge. So it'll be a similar kind of height. Jim, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I kayaked up all the way to the park that's up in West Bridgewater, and that was all free flowing.
It is
2 feet of water, perfect for kayaking. This was in the spring, in the late spring, so water was probably a little higher than it will be in the drought season. But yeah, no, I think it'll be great to be able to just go right all the way from the Route 28 down underneath High Street and continuing on. It's pretty good. A lot of these dam removals, I know when we pulled out Baloo Dam back in, Sandy, when was that? 2008 in Beckett, that we had people sending us pictures of them like the inaugural day kayaking down through the channel. And so I think it'll be pretty good.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Thomas Bertrand. I'll unmute him.
Hello. I'm a student from UMass Amherst, and I'm an environmental sciences major and a natural resource conservation minor. I'm attempting to work for the Department of Marine Fisheries one day. My question concerns the historical resources. I see that it's a big deal to try to hold on to these historical places. I'm just wondering how much that restricts your plan for the project implementation, or if it makes it more difficult at all.
Jim and Suzanne Chiro, would you mind taking that? Jim Turk.
Yeah, so Tom, as I said earlier, we are going through a consultation process with Mass Historical Commission, the Wampanoag Aquinas, Wampanoag Mashpee, Wampanoags, and so and also I should say the Bridgewater Historical Commission. So the first thing we need to do is hear back from some of the experts and make sure we understand any concerns about resources. We already have identified the ape area, so we know that there is going to be changes which are going to have an effect on historic resources, and so you know, oftentimes with dam removals, and like I said earlier, I'm not sure if you were on at the time, but I've worked on over 40 dam removals in the Northeast region. And so every one of these that we go through, um, most of them have some kind of effect on dams because the dam is more than 50 years old, right? And so we go through the consultation process, we document by an expert like Suzanne, who's available on a call here, and we try to document what is there, what in the history of what has occurred there, what we at least know that's in the record. And after that, I mean, basically, if there's other ways to do a better job, you know, before the project moves forward, to document whether it's putting together signage, educational signage, so the public will understand when they go out to the site, even though they don't see the historic factory that had been there, that they at least have enough information by um, historical photographs or maps and written narrative that explains what had been there. That's a mitigation measure that may be incorporated through the MOA. And so what we need to do is hear back from folks as to what may be required. But until we go through the process, we don't have a finite answer other than you know, just from experience, what we've done on many other dam removals. Now, I don't know, Suzanne, if you're there and you want to add to that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll just, I mean, Jim, you did a really great job explaining that. So mitigation for historic resources, in other words, above ground, you know, structures and buildings, like Jim explained, it consists of primarily archival, photographic documentation, written narratives. There can be historical signage, like Jim said, interpretive plaques. For archaeological resources, it's a little different. If archaeological resources cannot be avoided and protected, which I should say is the goal here, to avoid and protect below ground surfaces where there's the potential or known archaeological resources. But if that can't happen for whatever reason, because of design and just logistical constraints on the project, then we do do archaeological survey and excavation. So we could do what we call a data recovery, which would be to recover, you know, a sufficient sample of archaeological materials. And we've done that on a number of dam removals in Massachusetts prior to, or actually concurrent with, the construction work that's going on. So the archaeology will follow the project through construction, actually, because there will always be the potential for unanticipated discoveries, especially in the water portion of the project. There could be legacy dams, there could be resources that would be of Native American interest, such as remnant fish weirs that could be, you know, 1,000 or more years old. There could be dugout canoes if it was a navigable waterway during the pre-contact period. So those are the sorts of things the Native Americans are interested in as well, and they will follow the project. I don't want to scare anyone, but really the only thing that will slow down or potentially stop the dam removal process would be human remains. And, you know, we haven't had that happen yet. And I've been working on dam removals for, gosh, like Jim, probably close to 20 years now. I can't believe it. And, you know, but you always have to have that as a potential unanticipated. And if it turned out to be a Native American burial, well, then, you know, you're obviously going to have the tribes involved. But the process is put in place for that with NOAA and Mass Historical Commission. There's all of those notifications and process. So while it could slow down and potentially stop if a burial couldn't be moved, there's still a process in place to address it. So in other words, the project isn't just kind of having to throw their hands up and say, oh gosh, we need to walk away in the middle of this. if we've done our homework and our job correctly, then we can address those issues as they happen. So.
We have a question from Stephen Block.
Hi, my interest in this has been, I've been the park steward for Ironworks for the past 15 years or so, and I have two concerns. One is safety and involves the channel walls that have a very steep drop off. So over the years, we've embarked on projects when we've had the funding to be able to put up some limited fencing for protection there. Basically, that's stopped for lack of funding and also because of the uncertainty of this project. So how do you anticipate that those channel walls are going to be looking at as far as the drop off for people who are walking through the park?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for all your hard work on the park. It's a very
Sure.
beautiful park.
Yeah.
I'll just say safety is certainly a paramount issue for the town, as well as the private landowner. So that is certainly something we're thinking about as part of this project. That was actually just looking at that part of the design earlier today, so it's at the forefront of my mind. I'll let Andy and Jim sort of weigh in, but I think any sort of ideas that you have in relation to what you might like to see there for some sort of safety fence or safety railing along the side is certainly, we're open to that and open to have that conversation. So, I've seen what is around at the park now. It looks like a split rail fence with some plastic safety fence. So if that's your sort of preferred route, that's not a problem. But if there's something else, we're happy to talk about that.
Oh boy, we'd love to be able to do like some kind of an iron railing type of a fence that would honor the historical origins of the park. We didn't get into doing that because cost, just didn't have that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, an iron rail fence is certainly going to be expensive, and we don't have construction funds raised yet. We know it is going to be an expensive project. I mean, that's something we can continue to talk about, but we would definitely want to come up with a variety of alternatives in case there isn't sufficient funds. At a minimum, something though that will protect the public that use the park.
Yeah.
Andy and Jim, anything you want to add to that part of the question?
I don't think we show much in the way of fencing and railing in the parks, just because it's an existing park in areas where we're not impacting. But we do routinely, as we advance to 90 and final design, add in those kinds of park amenities if either the town or the park or Chris is interested in adding those kinds of things in. They're easy to do. It's just a matter of picking out the materials and deciding where to put those amenities.
Yeah.
Second question.
There will be impacting, if that level, as I understand, is going to drop about 5 feet, that's going to make that drop off more severe than it currently is. So, I certainly feel there's a responsibility on the part of this project to take that into account, to provide for, some sort of safety railings or grading or whatever there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It would be similar to what you have on the downstream side of the dam or the downstream face of the dam. In terms of upstream, it would be quite similar. I think the wall that you have sort of downstream of the dam, I don't know that extends upstream of the dam, so you might not have a vertical wall. It's hard to say. That could be underwater, and we wouldn't know. But yes, your overall point is correct. It would be similar to what you have just downstream of the dam.
Okay. The second part was just the remnants for the actual ironworks part of that dam itself, in terms of, there's got some gear work there. What is the plan for preserving that, either in a we're trying to get that warehouse that's off to the side by the highway department as part of a museum. Is the plan to leave that in place and perhaps put some plaques around it, or would they attempt to remove that and kind of have a collectible site for all the remnants from the park?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We heard a similar comment last winter. I had attended the Bridgewater Historic Commission meeting, and there were some similar comments. So as part of that feedback that we got at that time, we built into the project to salvage the mechanical gears at the dam, as well as some of the large granite slabs that are, quite unique, that make up the High Street Bridge. No entity has actually asked for those materials or had volunteered to take those materials. So that is still something that, I think still needs to be worked out. You do have the benefit of the DPW yard right there. So there probably is a place that it could be stored temporarily. But, there are no plans necessarily to rebuild any of those items, because one, I don't know that they necessarily could be rebuilt. Because I think there are missing parts, at least fully. But in terms of your point, they will be salvaged, and if the town or the park commission or any other entity wanted to, sort of take ownership, that would be great. Or if you had thoughts in terms of where it could go, we could talk about opportunities to incorporate certain elements into some sort of interpretive materials. So at that project that Jim Urek presented just down the road in East Bridgewater, we actually took a stone that was part of the dam, put it up along the side of the road, and mounted a plaque into it. So that's something that's pretty typical that we could do. Jim Turek, do you want to maybe respond? Is there any other ideas that you have or thoughts you have on the topic?
Not really at this time. I mean, we have other examples. With just to give you a very brief. Recently, we completed that Horseshoe Mill dam removal on the Weeantic and Wareham that Jim had showed my photos earlier. And over at that site, the Buzzards Bay Coalition actually, they basically saved the turbine that was in the raceway for that dam, that mill, and they salvaged that, and it's a feature as part of the site, and they're going to have some informational plaques, of course, on the history of the mill that had been there, and the multiple dams over since the 1700s that had been on the site. So all I can say is there are different ways about doing a project, and whether some of the material could be salvaged and turned into interpretive information. I think as long as it's something that we can fit into the project and works out in terms of the budget, and certainly I think people's ideas are going to be certainly thoroughly considered, and we'll discuss them. But that's about all I have. I mean, I don't know if Suzanne wants to add anything to that, but it's all work in progress. If just a matter kind of coming up with some ideas how it might best be approached.
Again, they've got the last remaining building from Ironworks is that four-walled roofless structure that's between the river and the highway department. I mean, my dream would be to have these artifacts located there, convert that to a museum, and gee, hey, if the state wants to have the wherewithal and the funding to be able to put a roof on that thing and kind of make it legitimate, that would be terrific.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have some other questions we want to.
Okay, thank you.
Forward. I think Mr. Wood was trying to raise his hand, so I'll unmute you. We can't hear you, Mr. Wood. We can't hear you. I don't think he knows we can't hear. We can't hear you. All right, we'll move on. Maybe he can. Yeah. Okay. We had a question from Carlton. I'll unmute him. He can ask his question.
Hi. Nice presentation. Thank you very much. Most of my comments so far have been submitted already in writing. Bob, they couldn't pick you up, Bob. My real question here is, given with the policy of removing every dam possible on this waterway and in the state that inhibit the fish movement, what's the schedule for removing the dam in West Bridgewater?
I assume you're referring to, Mr. Hunt, the War Memorial Park Dam. Before I pass that on, is that correct?
Correct. That dam's the last one that has restricts the movement of fish into the NIP.
Okay, maybe if Sarah Turner from the Division of Marine Fisheries is still with us, perhaps she could respond. But I do want to say that, West Bridgewater is not the focus of this presentation. Certainly, any context around the impoundment of the High Street Dam that goes into West Bridgewater is certainly on the table, but the West Bridgewater site is not really on the table for discussion.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just trying to understand your policies and how they're consistent and inconsistent. But yeah, there is a bridge in the impoundment that I've already written to you about. It's called the Comfort Willis Bridge, and the remnants are in fact there. And I think I provided you guys with pictures of it. So I'm hoping the 106 people will take a hard look at that.
Okay, well, let's see if Sarah can answer your question briefly about West Bridgewater War Memorial.
Hi. So we are currently still waiting for the results of the feasibility study on that project. The engineers had a few other projects ongoing. We've gone back and forth with them a few times on some potential design options for them to evaluate. But we, at this time, do not have the results of that initial study in hand yet. So, and the town on that project is the dam owner. So they would be the ones making decisions regarding how the project would proceed, as we do with all these cases. It's always the dam owner that has to decide what they want to do with their property. But so we've been working with the town, but the engineers have not yet gotten us a final feasibility report on that. So we're not moving on that one yet.
If I could just ask one more question. Who did your drone images of the bridge? They're beautiful.
That was Mylon and McBroom. I think Jim Murek.
Yep. Yeah, we flew it. I think it was a couple of years ago, back in 2017.
We have,
Mr. Hunt, I will entertain one last comment. You mentioned something about a bridge upstream that you wanted to, if you have just a brief comment, perhaps Suzanne Chereau could weigh in. She does have to leave a bit early, so I'll go give her an opportunity to respond.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, there are two features that are in the area of that's been designated of interest. The Comfort Willis Bridge was installed somewhere in the late 1600s, possibly the early 1700s. That bridge structure went over the river there, and that's what I have. And I've submitted you the historic documents that show that it's been in place for a long time. I also submitted images of it that were taken this September during low water of the remaining structures on the east, west, and central part of the river. And then the other thing is the Reynolds Landing, the depth of water that's expected to be lost there. Right now, you could put a canoe in at that Reynolds Landing location. In the future, it will be a lot harder once that water drops down. So I think those are things that the historic consultation needs to take a hard look at. Thank you.
Maybe Suzanne, would you mind, Suzanne Schro, would you mind just weighing in terms of, I guess, what you were able to consider as part of the Reynolds Landing with the research that you have done? And then maybe more broadly, just speak to how projects like these handle discoveries, underwater discoveries that, that come up once the impoundment is drawn down, and how things like that might be dealt with, findings like that might be dealt with after a project has started construction.
Right. So I have not seen your materials, Mr. Hunt, but they definitely would be very useful as we move further into the project design and then the construction phase, so that when those water levels are dropped, there will be an archaeological survey, a walkover survey of the entirety of the shoreline in the area of potential effect. And we did extend that all the way, at least, I think it's like a mile or a mile and a half upstream of High Street to cover that Reynolds Landing area and the area of the bridge. So we will, you've called those resources out. Those would be resources that we would be definitely looking for. And we would do an archaeological investigation, a visual of them, and probably, meet with members of the Historical Commission, yourself. And typically what we do is, assess remains for significance. What's their integrity, what's their composition. Obviously, the documentation you have will be very critical to that assessment of historical importance and significance. And then if those resources are going to be permanently exposed because the water levels now will have dropped to expose areas that might only be seasonally exposed right now or during times of very dry weather and low water. So if the project is causing them to be permanently exposed, we would work with the historical commissions, both the local and Massachusetts Historical Commission and the project team, to look at ways that the resources could be protected, to avoid degradation. And it could be a survey, it could be actually doing some kind of recordation and archaeological documentation, in anticipation of just kind of natural degradation occurring. So there will be a process in place, and it will start with an archaeologist doing a full walkover as those water levels start to come down, for sure.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I'll just add, Mr. Hunt, if there's any other materials, documentation that you uncover and you want to share it, please feel free to reach out to the email address that's shown on the screen right now. And you have my email address anyways. So I'd be happy to share those materials with Suzanne and PAL and and Jim Turek and others. So. With that, we're running a little bit low on time here, so I think Jennifer, maybe we have time for one or two more questions, and then we'll leave just a couple minutes at the end for some closing remarks.
Okay, so we have a question from Kitty. I'll unmute her. Kitty, you should be unmuted.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
You are, yep.
I'm very curious about future plans for the pedestrian access to Ironworks from the redesigned High Street. Will there be limited vehicle parking or new gate or signage? Right now, that is a project that was done probably within the last 6 years by people from Bay Circuit Alliance for the Bay Circuit Trail. They were the ones that had a work party in there and worked with Steve Black and the stewards from that particular park. So I'm wondering if that will be improved. And I'm also wondering where the canoe portage would be, or where there would be a put in place at the park. If it's fine for people to scoot down the river in a watercraft, but where will canoes offload if they wanted to put in at that park? I mean, from High Street, once it's all redesigned.
That's a great question. You know, in terms of the parking area, there will be a slight reconfiguration of the parking just next to the Wall Street intersection, the kind of where the DPW entrance is. I think that if I understood your question, I think.
Well,
yeah.
people can now park with in the DPW parking lot, but I wondered when you redo High Street, if there would be any type of improved visibility for an access there. And I know that it's difficult to have cars park at that intersection with traffic going in and out and up and down the roadways. So that's why it had always been thought of as a pedestrian exit, egress access. But I'm wondering now if there would be a new presentation from the street. And also if you're thinking still of maintaining park accessibility through the DPW, I'm wondering how that will be approached. And I realize that that's kind of fine tuning things. You have to get the rest of the stuff done first, but it should be thought of in the design if there's going to be a betterment on that.
Right, great comment. You know, there are, as you alluded to, you know, there really is no space along High Street to really change the parking situation there. So unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. You know, we will be accommodating parking as there currently is at toward the DPW entrance.
Yeah.
And then in terms of access down to the river, you know, we haven't actually designed an access entry point to the river yet, but that is something we can entertain as part of the final design process. So good comment. And if you have any thoughts, we'd be happy to hear them.
I think that that's an important consideration, is to indicate where somebody would load and offload and unload and put back on their vehicle, their craft.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that comment. If you have any follow-up thoughts, please feel free to email me. But yes, that's something we'll consult with the MMI team on incorporating that into the design. It's a good comment. Let's see. I guess it's 6:56. We do need to wrap up, but do we have the gentleman that wasn't able to speak? I guess we'll give him an opportunity since we tried to call him earlier.
I don't think he's on anymore.
Oh, all right. Well,
we did have one more person. I don't know if you.
Yeah, we'll take one more. Yeah, okay.
Well, Monica Bentley had a second question.
Hi, yeah, James Murek had mentioned the cotton gin that they had done earlier. I just want to use that as an example. But I was hiking behind the Sycamore Rock area, and I noticed an extremely large tree that had crossed that area. And I see this, you know, in a lot of different places. And I was just curious, who do I reach out to report something like that? I mean, it was blocking flow. It was mud downstream from that. So
it's a good question. I'm not really sure. Perhaps Sarah Turner might know. Is there entities that address blockages for river herring passage or anything like that? I know that's come up on some projects, but just briefly, Sarah Turner, do you mind weighing in?
Yeah, so I can be the point of contact for that. We actually work with the Town River Fisheries Commission on fish passage, and we go out fairly regularly to do stream maintenance. In fact, this is the time of year we've been going out a few days a week and dealing with some of these blockages, especially with the low flows we've had. So either you could, if it's easiest to just use Chris's email and Chris can pass you along to me, or my email is Sarah, SARA.Turner, TURNER at mass.gov. And I'd be happy to get that. Where did you say it was?
Just below the cotton gin on the Setauket.
Okay. Yeah, we've been going out. We've got a couple more weeks of stream work. So if it's a big blockage, we can definitely get in there. We've got a decent crew and we can bring a chainsaw. And usually what we do with something like that is we'll just take sort of chunks out of the middle and leave some wood on the streams so that, you know, there's fish habitat, but that it's not completely blocking the river.
That'd be great. Thank you.
No
I'll
problem.
see if I can find a photo that I took.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Well,
Thanks so much.
well, thank you everyone for joining. I want to first, before we wrap up, just give any of the partners an opportunity to weigh in if they have any sort of closing thoughts or comments. I know some people have to hop off and that's okay. So if there's anyone from the project team, feel free to weigh in if you want to add anything. All right, well, hearing none, thank you all very much. Mr. Dutton, do you want to have any final thoughts here or comments as we wrap up?
Thank you for the opportunity. I do want to thank the project team because, you know, I think you presented very clearly, and our hope and my hope would certainly be to be able to post this presentation or some version of this presentation on the town website and direct people's attention to it. So there's as much public input and public knowledge as possible out there. So I think that's key. It's always been key in projects I've done, and I think we're well on our way to that. So I appreciate everybody's work, and especially the project team. Chris, thank you for organizing this, and that is all I have. I don't know if anybody has any parting comments. All right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night.
All right, everyone. Thanks.